In the heat of June 1942, a small boy stepped into a United States Marine recruiting office. He was just 16 years old, stood only 5 feet 5 inches tall, and weighed barely 110 pounds. To anyone looking at him, he was nothing more than a child. The recruiters saw only weakness, a body too small, too light, too fragile for war. They laughed. The Navy rejected him. The Army paratroopers turned him away. "Go home and grow up," they said. But what the recruiters could not see was not his size, but the fire burning inside him. His name was Audie Murphy, a farm boy from Hunt County, Texas, who had learned to survive on his own. For 16 years he had lived a life that demanded toughness beyond his years. Life had not been kind. He had been born the sixth of 12 children into crushing poverty. His father, a struggling sharecropper, had abandoned the family. His mother, worn down by illness and hardship, died just after Audie's 16th birthday. Suddenly this small boy became the head of a family. The provider. The protector. Audie's weapon of choice was not a fancy rifle or a shiny pistol. It was a simple .22 caliber rifle. And yet, it was all he needed to feed his siblings. In the cotton fields and forests of Hunt County, he had honed a skill that would one day terrify armies. He could shoot with deadly precision, hitting moving rabbits at 50 yards when most men couldn't hit a barn. Every shot mattered. Every miss could mean an empty stomach for his brothers and sisters. There was no play, no sport, no practice in his shooting. There was only survival. Each bullet he fired was precious, each target a matter of life and death. And as he grew, so did his cold, calculating efficiency. He learned not just to shoot but to kill when necessary. That hunter's instinct, sharpened by hunger, would become his secret weapon. But the world outside his farm was blind to his skills. The recruiters only saw his size, his youth, his small frame. They could not imagine that a boy like him could become a weapon far deadlier than any machine or tank. They could not imagine that one day he would face hundreds of enemy soldiers alone and live to tell the tale. Audie refused to accept their judgment. If the army would not take him, he would find a way. Forging the documents necessary to claim he was 18, he returned to the regular Army infantry office. He looked younger than most boys, yet somehow this time the recruiters looked past his age. They accepted him. The United States Army had no idea what it had just done. They had not signed up a boy. They had enlisted a living weapon, a hunter forged by hunger and hardship. Before the battlefield, however, life continued to test him. Every day in Hunt County had been a lesson in endurance. The boy who could barely lift a rifle had carried the weight of an entire family. He had walked for miles through forests and fields, hunting rabbits, squirrels, and deer. He had faced the harsh elements, the blistering heat of summer, the biting cold of winter. And through it all he had survived. Neighbors remembered him as quiet, determined, and strangely fearless. They recalled watching him take aim and fire, hitting targets with an almost supernatural accuracy. Audie himself never bragged. He simply knew that if he did not hit what he aimed at, his family would go hungry. Hunger was his teacher and survival was his reward. But what made Audie truly remarkable was not just skill, it was the mindset he carried. While other boys worried about games and laughter, Audie thought only of solving problems. He measured risk, calculated angles, and learned patience. He understood that every decision, every action, every bullet had consequences. That same mindset would later make him one of the most feared soldiers in history. Even now, as he walked out of the recruiting office, small and unassuming, the world could not see what was coming. Everyone laughed at him. Everyone dismissed him. But no one realized that this too small boy from a poor Texas farm would one day terrify the German army, defy death, and change history. And so, Audie Murphy began a journey few could imagine. A journey from the cotton fields of Hunt County to the battlefields of Europe. A journey where hunger, hardship, and determination would transform a farm boy into a legend. The army had accepted him. The world was still blind to the storm about to arrive. Audie Murphy was finally a soldier, but the army did not see a hero. They saw a small, weak boy. In the barracks he was treated like a mascot. The drill sergeants laughed at him. His fellow recruits called him baby. Every push-up, every march, every obstacle seemed impossible for his tiny frame. They expected him to break. They expected him to quit. But Murphy had been forged by hardship. He had carried the weight of 12 mouths to feed. He had survived hunger, loss, and death. Quitting was not an option. From the very first day, Murphy understood one truth. The army didn't care about his skill, they cared about rules. But rules had never helped him survive. In Hunt County, he had learned that life rewards only the clever and the relentless. He trained harder than anyone else. He ran faster. He lifted heavier. He carried rifles and packs far beyond what he should have managed. Every drill, every exercise he treated as real. Every shot at the range he treated as life or death. The first time the other soldiers saw him fire a rifle, they were stunned. His baby blue eyes turned cold as winter. One by one he picked off targets with a precision that seemed impossible for a boy his size. He never missed. Not once. Drill sergeants who had doubted him were silent. Murphy didn't fight with anger or pride. He fought with focus, like a hunter calculating every move of his prey. By July 1943, Murphy was ready for the battlefield. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, landed in Sicily. The mountains were rugged and unforgiving. The enemy was prepared. But Murphy's upbringing had been the perfect training ground. He moved silently, using the terrain like an extension of his own body. Every rock, tree, and ridge became part of his plan. While others hesitated, Murphy advanced, always observing, always calculating. The first test came quickly. Near the town of Palermo, his unit was pinned down by a German machine gun. Doctrine said to wait for support. But Murphy's doctrine was simple: survival. He could not wait. He could not risk his friends' lives. Crawling through rocks and brush, he approached the enemy alone. With grenades and careful aim, he eliminated the entire crew. Then, in a bold move, he turned the captured machine gun on the retreating Germans, forcing them to flee. Captain Paul Harris, watching in disbelief, recommended him for a Bronze Star. He wrote, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary." But extraordinary was an understatement. Murphy had discovered something terrifying about himself. He was exceptionally good at killing. Not out of hatred, not out of rage, but out of necessity, cold calculation, and a drive to protect those he loved. The Italian campaign became Murphy's proving ground. At the Volo River in October 1943, his squad was decimated by a German counterattack. While others retreated, Murphy grabbed a borrowed sniper rifle and held the position alone. He killed 5 enemy soldiers from over 300 yards away, earning the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest medal in the Army. By now, Murphy was not just a soldier. He was a force of nature, a nightmare for the Wehrmacht. Staff Sergeant William Polson described his method. Muff didn't fight angry. That's what made him terrifying. He fought cold, calculated, like arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next. No emotion, no hesitation. Just deadly efficiency. Then came the beachhead at Anzio. The Germans had a tank, the single greatest fear of infantrymen. While others took cover and fired at a distance, Murphy crawled toward the tank. Using terrain for cover, he closed into point-blank range. With a bazooka, he destroyed the German machine completely. He earned his first Silver Star. Murphy had survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He had been wounded, promoted to sergeant, and his reputation spread faster than he could imagine. To the Germans he was invisible. To his men he was a legend. But even with all these victories, Murphy's greatest challenge was still ahead. The Culmer Pocket in France would test everything he had learned. The training, the skill, and the courage that no one had believed a 16-year-old farm boy could possess. Yet even now, there was no room for doubt in Murphy's mind. The battlefield had become his classroom, the enemy his teacher, and his rifle the tool of his survival. Everything he had learned in the forests of Hunt County, patience, focus, precision, would become invaluable in the coming battles. And while his comrades still saw a small, unassuming boy, Murphy was quietly preparing to do the impossible. The Germans were seasoned, elite soldiers, veterans of Norway and Finland. They were strong, well-equipped, and confident in their abilities. They had never faced someone like Audie Murphy. And when they did, the world would witness a display of courage, skill, and intelligence that would be remembered forever. Suspense cliffhanger. The boy who could not join the Marines, the farm boy who everyone laughed at, was about to face his first true test against the might of the German army. What he would do next would not just save lives, it would change the course of history. Audie Murphy had survived the harsh mountains and deadly battles of Sicily and Italy, but survival alone was not enough. In the crucible of war, he was beginning to transform from a small, underestimated farm boy into a soldier feared by the enemy and respected by his comrades. Every encounter, every firefight sharpened him, teaching lessons no training camp ever could. The Italian campaign was relentless. From the beaches of Salerno to the blood-soaked ridges of Anzio, Murphy's unit faced a determined enemy at every turn. He saw friends fall, men he had laughed with, shared meals with, and trained with, cut down in seconds. Most soldiers would break under the weight of such horror, but Murphy's mind and body were tempered like steel. He had grown up fighting to feed his family, killing to survive was nothing new. Murphy's skill with a rifle became legendary among his fellow soldiers. At the Volo River, when his squad was pinned down by an enemy counterattack, he grabbed a sniper rifle, positioned himself on a ridge and held the line alone. 5 enemy soldiers were killed at over 300 yards, and the position was saved. His actions earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. Yet even with awards piling up, Murphy never acted for recognition. To him, war was not about medals, it was about survival, strategy, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Murphy's reputation began to spread quickly. Staff Sergeant William Polson said, "Muff didn't fight angry. That's what made him terrifying. He fought cold, calculated, like arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next. No emotion, no hesitation. Just deadly efficiency." This precision, born from years of hunting rabbits to feed his siblings, had turned him into a living weapon. The danger of war never slowed him down. At Anzio he faced a German tank, the ultimate nightmare for infantry. While others hesitated, Murphy used the terrain, crawled close, and with a bazooka destroyed the armored threat. The infantry watched in awe as the boy who had been rejected by recruiters stood fearless in the line of fire. For this act he earned his first Silver Star. Murphy's rise was not just about killing the enemy. It was about leadership. Despite being young, slight, and often underestimated, he began to lead. He learned to move men strategically, anticipate enemy actions, and make split-second decisions that could mean life or death. By now, Murphy's nickname, Muff, carried weight. Even officers deferred to his judgment in difficult situations. Yet, despite all his achievements, Murphy remained humble. He never sought glory. He never boasted. His eyes, once bright with the innocence of a farm boy, had grown sharp, alert, and cold. He calculated every move, every shot, every step. There was no room for error. In war, one mistake could cost dozens of lives. Anne Murphy had learned, from the cotton fields of Hunt County to the frozen ridges of Italy, that every life mattered. The enemy began to take notice. German soldiers, hardened veterans of the Eastern Front in Norway, whispered about the small American soldier who seemed everywhere at once. He was a shadow in the mountains, invisible yet deadly. They could not understand him, could not predict him, and, most importantly, could not stop him. A boy who should have been useless had become an instrument of fear and precision. By late 1943, Murphy's unit had suffered heavy casualties. He had seen the deaths of comrades, friends, and even commanding officers. Each loss hardened him further. But it also taught him strategy and patience. He understood the value of terrain, timing, and psychology in combat. While others relied solely on brute force, Murphy combined observation, cunning, and sheer courage. This was not reckless bravery, it was battlefield intelligence honed under the harshest conditions. Yet even with all his victories in Italy, the real test was still to come. The Allied forces were preparing for the invasion of France. Murphy and Company B would face the German 2nd Mountain Division, elite troops who had fought in Norway, Finland, and the Eastern Front. These were experienced, disciplined soldiers who had seen every horror of war. But none had faced someone like Audie Murphy. The stakes could not have been higher. Murphy had grown from a boy who was laughed at in recruiting offices to a soldier whose name inspired fear in the enemy. But France would test everything he had learned. The tactics, the courage, and the cold, calculating mind that had kept him alive in Sicily and Italy. Suspense cliffhanger. Audie Murphy had survived impossible battles, earned medals, and risen through the ranks. But in the frozen fields of France, he would face a challenge unlike any before. 250 German soldiers, 6 tanks, and a single burning chance to save his comrades. Could the small farm boy truly become a one-man army? The answer was about to be written in fire and blood. By August 1944, Audie Murphy had proven himself again and again in Italy. He had survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He had earned medals, respect, and a reputation that spread faster than bullets on a battlefield. But nothing could have prepared him for the challenge that awaited in France. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, had been deployed to the Culmer Pocket, a frozen stretch of French territory still held by elite German forces. The mission was simple in theory: hold the line. In reality, it was a nightmare. The Germans were prepared, their numbers overwhelming, their resolve unshakable. Company B was already battered. In 5 days of relentless combat, they had lost over half their men. The officers were dead or evacuated. Out of 187 soldiers, only 40 remained fit for duty. And the enemy was advancing. Murphy, now a young sergeant, assessed the situation with the calm of someone who had seen death too many times to be surprised by it. His men were exhausted, frostbitten, and terrified. Machine guns were frozen, ammunition was scarce, and morale was at its lowest. Yet he refused to panic. He was the line between survival and annihilation. At dawn on January 26, 1945, a gray winter sky hung over the Kalmar Pocket. The ground was frozen solid, a mile of open field stretching between Company B and the German lines. At 1 p.m., the Germans began their artillery barrage. Shells rained down, tearing trees, tossing earth, and freezing every man where he stood. For 30 minutes it was chaos, pain, and fear. Then the infantry came. At first, the Americans could barely see the Germans in their white snow camouflage, moving like ghosts across the field. 6 tanks rolled forward, their engines growling, while 250 soldiers spread out, advancing with precision. For most soldiers this was a moment of despair. But not for Murphy. He saw the battlefield differently. He saw opportunity, angles, weak points. The M10 tank destroyers were Company B's only anti-tank weapon. Murphy knew their limitations. The crews were exhausted, their hands numb from the cold, and their first shots missed the enemy. When the forward M10 was struck by an 88mm shell, it erupted in flames. The crew scrambled for cover. The second vehicle slid into a ditch, useless. The German infantry was closing fast. It was a perfect storm of danger, an impossible situation. And yet, Murphy refused to retreat. He ordered his men to fall back to prepared positions deeper in the woods, giving them a chance to survive. But he himself did not move. He ran forward, straight into the heart of danger, toward the burning M10 tank destroyer. Black smoke poured from its hull, the fuel and ammunition inside threatening to explode at any moment. To most, it was a death sentence. To Murphy, it was a position of power. Climbing onto the burning tank, he manned the .50 caliber Browning machine gun. He held the field telephone in one hand, calling in artillery strikes, while firing with the other. One man against 250 infantry and 6 tanks. For the next hour, Murphy became a one-man army. Every shot was deliberate, precise. Every movement calculated. German soldiers approached, only to be cut down. Tanks could not advance without infantry, and the infantry was systematically destroyed by a single exposed figure on a burning vehicle. Sergeant Elma Broly, watching from the woods, later said, "The Germans got within 10 yards, but he killed them like it was a shooting gallery." He wasn't reckless. He was terrifyingly precise. Shrapnel tore through his leg, his second wound of the day, but Murphy did not stop. He called artillery on his own position, willing to risk everything to save his men. At 3:20 p.m., after 60 minutes of continuous fire, the German attack finally faltered. The surviving infantry retreated. The tanks, without infantry support, reversed course. Murphy climbed down from the burning vehicle, his uniform scorched, his leg bleeding. He calmly checked on his men, lit a cigarette, and asked for a status report. His composure was frightening. The battlefield was littered with German bodies. Estimates suggest Murphy killed or wounded 50 enemy soldiers alone. The elite 2nd Mountain Division, veterans who had fought in Norway and Finland, had been humiliated by a single farm boy. The tactical defeat was so severe that German records scarcely mention the battle. They could not reconcile their loss. One boy had shattered an entire assault. Murphy's actions saved not just his company, but potentially thousands of lives. By holding the line at the Kalmar Pocket, he disrupted German defenses across Alsace. The bridgehead west of the Rhine fell in the following days, freeing Allied forces for the final push into Germany. One farm boy had changed the course of history. And yet, even in triumph, the cost was clear. Murphy had faced death for an hour, exposed and alone. He had been wounded, surrounded, and outnumbered. But he had not hesitated. He had acted with the deadly precision, cold calculation, and courage that had been honed in the cotton fields of Texas. The world was about to see what a small, underestimated boy could achieve. Suspense cliffhanger. Audie Murphy had faced impossible odds and survived. But the war was not over, and even greater challenges, and personal battles, awaited him. How could one boy continue to carry such a burden, against men, machines, and the darkness within? The next chapter of his story would test more than his courage, it would test his soul. The morning of January 26, 1945, had begun with fear and exhaustion. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, was reduced to just 40 men. The Germans, elite troops of the 2nd Mountain Division, were advancing across the frozen fields of the Kalmar Pocket. 6 tanks rumbled forward, and 250 infantry soldiers spread out like a tide of death. Every American soldier knew this could be their last battle. Amid the chaos, Audie Murphy remained calm. He was 19, just 110 pounds and wounded in the leg, but he moved with precision. His mind calculated angles, distances, and timing. His eyes, once the blue of a Texas sky, were now cold and focused. He was not just fighting, he was orchestrating a battle with the skill of a general and the instincts of a hunter. The two M10 tank destroyers were Company B's only hope against the advancing tanks. The crews fired desperately, but the enemy's armor and numbers were overwhelming. The forward tank was hit by an 88mm shell and erupted in flames. The crew scrambled and fled. The second tank slid into a ditch, its tracks useless on the frozen ground. The Germans pressed forward, gaining ground with every step. Murphy knew that artillery alone could not stop them. Retreating would mean certain annihilation for his men. Without hesitation, he ordered his soldiers to fall back to prepared positions in the woods. But he did not follow them. Instead, he ran forward, through the hail of bullets and exploding shells, straight toward the burning M10. Black smoke poured from the turret. Inside, 300 gallons of diesel fuel and 51 rounds of high-explosive ammunition threatened to turn the vehicle into a massive bomb. Most men would have frozen in terror. Murphy climbed atop the burning tank as though it were solid ground. He took the .50 caliber Browning machine gun in his hands. With one hand, he held the field telephone, calling in artillery strikes on the approaching Germans. With the other, he fired relentlessly, every shot precise, calculated, lethal. German infantry advanced within 10 yards, but wherever they came, Murphy was ready. They had trained for years to fight, but none had faced a one-man army standing fearless in the middle of a battlefield. Private First Class Donald Ekman, watching from the cover of the woods, later said, "I saw him climb onto the tank. I thought he was crazy. But it was the bravest thing I had ever seen. He became our wall, our shield, our hope." For a full hour, Murphy held the field. He became the focal point of an impossible defense. The Germans could not advance without infantry, and the infantry could not survive the hail of bullets he unleashed. His leg was wounded, his uniform scorched by flames, yet he never paused. He called artillery directly onto his own position, using every available weapon to protect his men. He was willing to sacrifice everything to ensure their survival. Sergeant Elma Broly described it best. The Germans tried everything. They got close. They fired shells. They charged. But one man stood there, unstoppable. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. After 60 minutes of continuous fire, the impossible was achieved. The German infantry faltered. Tanks, unsupported, reversed course. Murphy climbed down from the burning tank, checked his men, and lit a cigarette as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Company B was alive. The Germans had been stopped. One small farm boy had defeated 250 elite soldiers and 6 tanks. The aftermath was devastating. The frozen fields were littered with German casualties. The elite 2nd Mountain Division, veterans of Norway and the Eastern Front, had been humiliated. Their plans were shattered. Their pride broken. Historians later noted a remarkable silence in German records. They could not explain what had happened. One boy had done what dozens of soldiers could not. Murphy's actions at the Kulmer Pocket had consequences far beyond that single battle. By holding the line, he disrupted German positions across Alsace. The bridgehead west of the Rhine fell in the following days, freeing tens of thousands of Allied soldiers for the final assault into Germany. One small man had altered the map of the war. Yet even in victory, the toll on Murphy was evident. He had faced death repeatedly, carried the burden of his men's lives, and been wounded multiple times. He had survived what seemed impossible, yet each act of bravery weighed heavily on his mind. The farm boy who had been laughed at in recruiting offices had become America's greatest soldier, but even he was human. Suspense cliffhanger. Audie Murphy had faced impossible odds, become a one-man army, and changed the course of a battle, and perhaps the war itself. But the war was not over. More challenges, more horrors, and more personal battles awaited him. Could this small boy from Texas survive what came next, or would the weight of war finally break him? The guns had fallen silent, and the war in Europe was over. The Allies had pushed into Germany, Hitler's regime had collapsed, and victory had been declared. Yet for Audie Murphy, the battles were far from finished. He returned to America as the nation's greatest hero, the boy who had single-handedly stopped an army, the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Parades, medals, and magazine covers celebrated him. But beneath the medals and headlines, a far more personal battle had begun. Murphy had survived what no other man could survive. He had faced 250 German soldiers, 6 tanks, artillery fire, and freezing cold, and lived. He had climbed atop a burning tank, his uniform scorched, his leg wounded, and called artillery on his own position to save his men. He had killed, maimed, and outmaneuvered the enemy. The physical wounds had healed, but the memories lingered like ghosts in his mind. Nightmares haunted him. Every night, he relived the frozen fields of the Kalmar Pocket. He woke screaming, drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if artillery shells still exploded around him. Darkness became a terror he could not escape. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and even in daylight, shadows reminded him of enemy snipers and tanks. Friends and fellow soldiers noticed the change. Murphy was no longer just the calm, cold, calculated soldier. He was haunted. Insomnia became routine. He could not rest, could not find peace. Yet he refused to speak of it. He believed that admitting fear or trauma would be weakness. But the boy who had survived against impossible odds was now fighting an invisible enemy, post-traumatic stress, then known as battle fatigue. Hollywood called. Murphy became a movie star, starring in over 40 films including To Hell and Back where he played himself. To the public it seemed a perfect ending, a hero who survived the war and became a famous actor. But fame could not heal the wounds of the battlefield. He laughed, charmed, and entertained during the day, but at night the horrors of Europe returned. His first marriage lasted only 16 months. His wife Wanda Hicks could not understand the man who shifted between charm and terror, laughter and fear. The soldier who had faced death unflinchingly on foreign soil was now terrified of shadows in his own home. Yet Murphy refused to give up. He sought help where he could, shared his story reluctantly, and began to speak openly about the invisible wounds of war. In the 1960s, Murphy became a public advocate for veterans' mental health. He broke regulations defying the stigma around battle fatigue. He spoke about his nightmares, insomnia, and hypervigilance. "I have it," he said plainly, acknowledging the trauma that had haunted him for years. By admitting his struggles, he gave countless veterans permission to seek help, to confront the darkness that followed them home. Pamela Archer, a former airline stewardess, entered Murphy's life and became the anchor he desperately needed. Unlike others, she did not run from his pain or his demons. She understood the two sides of the man, the fearless hero and the haunted survivor. Their marriage brought stability, understanding, and companionship that allowed Murphy to continue his advocacy while building a family. Pamela became his field modification against the chaos in his mind. She supported him as he fought for veterans, helped him manage his insomnia, and stood by him as he relived battles through nightmares. Together, they navigated the invisible battlefield of post-war life, turning Murphy's experiences into a mission that extended beyond medals and fame. Even as Murphy's career flourished, he never forgot the men he had fought beside, nor the soldiers who did not survive. His advocacy became his purpose. He worked tirelessly to ensure that other veterans, especially those suffering from PTSD, were seen, heard, and helped. Pamela was his partner in this mission, a quiet hero in her own right. Yet Murphy's life remained fragile. The trauma of war never fully left him. He continued to struggle with insomnia, nightmares, and hypervigilance. Every loud noise, every flash of light, brought memories of artillery and gunfire. The boy who had survived impossible odds on the battlefield now fought to survive within himself. Suspense cliffhanger. Murphy's war was over, yet his greatest battles had only begun. The world saw a hero, a legend, a movie star. But the man behind the medals faced enemies that could not be killed by bullets or grenades. Could he survive this new war, the invisible battle inside his mind, or would it claim him before its time? The final chapter of his story would reveal the true measure of courage, love, and legacy. Audie Murphy's war had ended, but his story did not. The boy who had survived the impossible, the small farm boy who climbed a burning tank and stopped 250 German soldiers, had returned to a country that celebrated his heroism. Parades, medals, and magazine covers honored him. Hollywood offered fame and fortune. Yet the true measure of his courage would be tested not in battlefields abroad, but in the quiet struggles of everyday life at home. Murphy's post-war life was filled with contradictions. By day he was the nation's greatest hero, a celebrated actor starring in films about his own battles. By night, he faced the relentless echoes of war, nightmares, insomnia, and a mind trapped in the frozen fields of France and Italy. His hands shook in sleep, shadows became enemies. For a man who had stared down death countless times, even the smallest noise could bring terror. Yet he continued to fight, not with rifles or grenades, but with courage and determination against the invisible scars of war. Pamela Murphy, his second wife, became the anchor that held him steady. She understood the two men inside Audie, the fearless soldier and the haunted survivor. She did not shy away from his darkness. She faced it alongside him, providing support, love, and unwavering loyalty. Their marriage allowed Murphy to continue his work for veterans, using his fame and voice to advocate for those suffering from post-traumatic stress. Murphy's advocacy changed lives. He spoke publicly about battle fatigue, giving veterans permission to seek help. He fought the bureaucracy, the stigma, and the ignorance surrounding mental health. Thousands of men and women found hope because he admitted his struggle. In many ways, Murphy's greatest act of heroism was not on the battlefield. It was the courage to confront his own trauma and use it to help others. Yet life was not kind to the hero. Despite fame and medals, Murphy faced financial difficulties caused by bad investments and mismanagement. He died at the age of 45 in a plane crash in the mountains of Virginia, leaving behind Pamela and their 2 young sons. The world mourned the loss of its greatest soldier. The man who had survived impossible odds on foreign soil had finally been taken by chance, a reminder that life's battles are often unpredictable. Pamela Murphy's response to her husband's death was nothing short of extraordinary. Rather than retreating into grief, she dedicated herself to completing the mission that had defined Audie's life, helping veterans. She took a modest position at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles, working tirelessly to ensure that no soldier was left unheard or uncared for. From lost benefits to misplaced files, she became a one-woman army, cutting through bureaucracy with determination and dignity. For 35 years, Pamela fought for the forgotten. She treated every veteran, from the homeless soldier in the hallway to decorated officers, with the same respect and care. She became the living embodiment of Audie Murphy's philosophy: leave no one behind. In doing so, she preserved not only his memory but his mission, ensuring that the sacrifices of countless men and women were honored and protected. Audie Murphy's legacy is twofold. On the battlefield, he became a symbol of courage, skill, and determination. One small boy, rejected by recruiters and underestimated by everyone, had stopped an entire German assault, saved his comrades, and altered the course of a battle, and perhaps the war itself. In civilian life, he became a symbol of resilience, speaking openly about trauma, mental health, and the hidden costs of war. Pamela's work extended that legacy. Through her dedication, she ensured that Murphy's story was not just a tale of medals and heroics but a reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of compassion, advocacy, and perseverance. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, stands as a testament to both their efforts, a symbol of courage, service, and enduring love. Even decades after their deaths, the story of Audie and Pamela Murphy continues to inspire. It is a story of a small boy who became a one-man army, of a man who faced invisible enemies after the war, and of a woman who carried forward his mission when he could no longer fight. Their legacy reminds the world that true heroism is not just about bravery in battle but about perseverance, compassion, and the courage to continue fighting, even when the enemy is unseen. Final reflection: Audie Murphy had been a boy who no one believed in, a soldier who defied death, and a hero whose greatest battles were not always fought on the battlefield. Pamela Murphy ensured that his story, and the stories of countless veterans, were never forgotten. Together they showed the world that courage comes in many forms, through rifles, through advocacy, and through love. One small farm boy and the woman who loved him changed the course of history and touched the lives of thousands. Their story is the ultimate testament to bravery, resilience, and the power of the human spirit.